My daughter called me a burden on this family on the morning of my 71st birthday. She said it the way you'd comment on the weather, flat, matter of fact, like she'd been rehearsing it for weeks and finally found the right moment to let it out. I was standing at the kitchen counter in my robe, making coffee the same way I've made it for 40 years. 2 scoops of Folgers, a pinch of salt, the old percolator my husband bought at a yard sale in 1987. She walked in, looked around the kitchen like she was appraising it, and said, "Mum, let's be honest with each other. This house is too much for you. And honestly, so is everything else." I didn't say a word. I just watched the coffee drip and thought about the fact that I had given birth to this woman, that I had sat with her through 3 ear infections, 2 broken hearts, and a miscarriage she didn't tell her own husband about for a week. I was the one she called. And now she was standing in the kitchen her father built. He tiled that backsplash himself, every single piece the summer before he got sick, telling me I was a burden. I poured my coffee. I said, "Happy birthday to me." She didn't even flinch. "My name is Lorena. I'm 71 years old. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, in the same house where I raised 2 children and buried a husband. And I am going to tell you what happened over the next 8 months, because it is the kind of story that people don't believe until it happens to them. And by the time it's happening to them, it is almost too late. My husband, Gerald, passed away 4 years ago from a stroke. It was fast, which people always say like it's a mercy, and I suppose it was, though it didn't feel like one at the time. We had 39 years together. He was an electrician, a Sunday school teacher, a man who kept a bird feeder in the backyard and learned every species by name. When he died, he left me the house free and clear, a modest life insurance policy, and a folder in the filing cabinet labeled for Lorena just in case that contained every account number, every password, every instruction I'd ever need. He had organized it the previous winter after his first small episode. He didn't tell me he was doing it. He just did it because that was Gerald. The house is worth somewhere around $480,000 now. It wasn't worth a quarter of that when we bought it. Asheville changed. Everything changed. And my daughter Melissa noticed. Melissa is 44. She's married to a man named Bryce who works in commercial real estate and has very firm opinions about square footage. They have 2 kids in private school, a mortgage on a house in Charlotte that I later found out was upside down, and a lifestyle that costs significantly more than what they bring in. I knew some of this. I didn't know all of it. My son Tommy lives in Portland, Oregon. He's quieter, less present, the kind of child who sends birthday cards on time but calls infrequently. We love each other. We are not particularly close. That's just how it is with some children, and I stopped grieving it years ago. It was Melissa who first suggested, about 6 months after Gerald died, that I might want to think about downsizing. I told her I'd think about it. I didn't think about it. I was still sleeping on Gerald's side of the bed because my side felt too close to the window and I couldn't stand the draft. It was Bryce who first used the phrase unlocking the equity during a Sunday dinner in February, 2 years after Gerald passed. He said it the way people say grace, automatically, without looking up from his food. I told him that the equity was doing just fine, locked where it was. He smiled the way men smile when they've decided not to argue with you yet. The birthday conversation, the birding conversation, that was the beginning of the real campaign. Within a week, Melissa was calling every other day. The calls had a shape to them. She would start with normal things. "How are you? Have you seen the news? Did you get that package I sent?" Then she would work her way around to the house. Always the house. Was I keeping up with the maintenance? Had I gotten the gutters cleaned? Did I know what a new HVAC system would cost? She sent me an article about seniors who had fallen and not been discovered for days. She sent me listings for senior communities in the area. Cheerful photographs of women doing water aerobics. I'm a retired high school English teacher. I taught Faulkner and O'Connor and Baldwin for 28 years. I know how a story is constructed. I could see exactly what she was building and exactly where it was supposed to end. But I let her talk. My neighbor, Faye, is 76 and has lived next door since our kids were in elementary school together. She noticed things that I tried not to see. One afternoon in April, she came over with a pot of chicken and rice. She did this periodically, always with a reason that had nothing to do with the real reason. And she sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, Lorena, I saw Bryce drive by this street 3 times last Tuesday, just slow, like he was measuring something. I told her she was probably imagining it. She said, I taught fourth grade for 31 years. I don't imagine things. In May, Melissa asked me to see a doctor. Not my regular doctor. Nguyen, who I've been seeing for 12 years and who plays tennis on weekends and once told me my blood pressure was the envy of women 20 years younger. Melissa wanted me to see a specialist. A neurologist. She said she was worried about my memory. She gave me specific examples. I had repeated a story about Gerald's sister twice in one phone call. I had asked her the same question about Thanksgiving plans 2 weeks in a row. I sat with that for a few days. Then I thought about it carefully, and I realized I couldn't actually remember repeating the story about Gerald's sister. I remember telling it once. Melissa was the only other person who could confirm either version. I called my friend Harlan, who I have known since we were both teachers at the same high school, who is now 73, semi-retired, and meaner than a wet cat when he needs to be. He's a good listener and a better thinker. I told him what was happening. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, She's building a case. I said, A case for what? He said, A guardianship. Or at minimum, enough doubt about your competency to pressure you into decisions you wouldn't otherwise make. I said, Harlan, that is a very dramatic thing to say. He said, Lorena, you just told me your son-in-law has been driving by your house to measure it. That's not dramatic. That's a man who's decided the house is already his. I went to see Dr. Num the following week. I told her everything. She referred me to a cognitive specialist of her own choosing. Not Melissa's doctor, a different one entirely. And 3 weeks later, I had a full neurological workup. My results were, in the doctor's words, entirely unremarkable. Everything exactly where it should be for a woman my age. He said my recall and processing were above average. I did not tell Melissa about this appointment. I called a lawyer named Yvette, who had handled Gerald's estate and whom I trusted completely. I sat in her office on a Wednesday afternoon, and I explained everything from the beginning, the calls, the articles, the specialist suggestion, Bryce driving by the house. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she set down her pen and said, Lorena, I want you to do 3 things. First, document everything going forward. Dates, times, what was said. Second, do not sign anything. Not a thing. Not a form, not an agreement, not a card at a restaurant. Nothing that has your name on a line. And third, keep this conversation between us. I asked her if she thought Melissa really understood what she was doing. Yvette said, in my experience, people in financial desperation have a way of convincing themselves that what they want is also what's best for everyone. That summer was strange. Melissa came to visit in June with the grandchildren, and it was almost normal. We went to the farmer's market. We ate on the back porch. The kids helped me plant tomatoes in the raised bed Gerald had built. I watched Bryce walk the perimeter of the yard while the children played. He looked at the foundation. He looked at the roof line. He looked at the detached garage. He had the expression of a man taking inventory. In July, Melissa called to tell me that she and Bryce had been talking, and they thought the best solution for everyone would be if I transferred the house into a family trust. They would manage it. I would still live there, of course. Nothing would change day to day. It would just be smarter from a tax perspective, she said, and it would protect the asset for the grandchildren. I said, let me think about it. I called Yvette the same afternoon. She said the words, absolutely not, before I had finished my second sentence. That call with Yvette lasted 40 minutes. By the end of it, I understood what a transfer into a family trust managed by Melissa and Bryce would actually mean. I understood what still living there would mean without my name on the deed. I understood what could happen to me if my daughter decided, for whatever reason, at whatever moment, that my presence in the house was no longer convenient. I started keeping a notebook, green, spiral-bound, the same kind I used to grade papers in. Every call, every visit, every conversation that had a shape to it. I wrote down dates and times and exact words when I could remember them. In August, Melissa arrived at my door on a Saturday morning unannounced. She had a man with her, older, grey-haired, carrying a briefcase. She introduced him as an estate planning consultant who had some ideas he wanted to share with me. She said it the way you'd say a friend had stopped by for coffee. I looked at the man. I looked at Melissa. I said, I have a lawyer. Melissa said, Mom, this isn't adversarial. We're family. I said, then come have coffee without the briefcase. The man left. Melissa came inside. She cried. She told me I was treating her like a stranger. She told me she was only trying to protect me. She said she knew I was lonely, that the grief had affected me more than I was willing to admit, that she was scared I was going to make a bad decision or fall victim to a scam. She was very good. I almost felt guilty, and I recognized, in a cold, clear part of my mind, that recognizing a manipulation and being unaffected by it are not the same thing. After she left, I went next door to Faye's. I sat at her table and I said, She's going to keep coming. Faye poured me sweet tea and said, Then we're going to keep being ready. I didn't know what she meant by we at the time. I would find out. September brought a letter. It came certified mail from a firm I didn't recognize in Charlotte. It was formal and dense, and I had to read it 3 times to understand what it was saying underneath the language. Melissa and Bryce were requesting a formal guardianship evaluation. They were citing concerns about my cognitive health and my ability to manage my own finances and property. They had included statements, affidavits, technically, from 2 individuals attesting to specific instances of my confusion and erratic behavior. I read those affidavits very carefully. One was from a woman I had met once at Melissa's house, a friend of hers from a neighborhood book club. The other was from a man I did not recognize at all. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The light came through the window the way it always has in the afternoon, the same angle it hit the backsplash tiles Gerald laid, and I thought about the fact that my daughter had found 2 people, one of whom I barely knew, one I had never met, to sign papers saying I was losing my mind. I called Yvette. She already knew. She had been anticipating it. What Melissa and Bryce did not know was this. 2 months earlier, and Yvette's advice, I had made a specific set of legal preparations. I had updated my will. I had established a revocable living trust, entirely in my own name, with Yvette as the initial trustee and Harlan as the alternate, neither of whom were family members. I had put both my financial accounts and the house deed into that trust. I had given Yvette limited durable power of attorney over financial matters, and I had given my medical power of attorney to Faye. Melissa's guardianship petition was targeting a legal structure that no longer existed. Yvette also told me about the affidavits. She had already located the woman from the book club, who, when contacted, was horrified to learn what her statement was being used for, and agreed to provide a retraction immediately. The man I didn't recognize turned out to have a complicated relationship with the truth in a number of documented contexts, and Yvette had found records accordingly. Then there was Faye. Faye, who had been paying attention since February when Bryce first drove slowly past the house. Faye, who had written down her own dates and times in her own notebook without me asking her to. Faye, who had spoken to 3 other neighbors who had also noticed things. Faye, who I later learned had called Tommy in Portland in August and told him in plain and direct language exactly what was happening to his mother. Tommy flew in from Portland the first weekend of October. He came alone, without warning, on a Friday night. I opened the door and saw him standing there with a duffel bag and the expression of a man who hasn't slept well in several weeks. He said, "Mom, I should have called sooner. I'm sorry." We sat in the living room until midnight. He told me that Melissa had called him over the summer, that she had presented the whole situation as a matter of concern for my well-being, that it had sounded reasonable. He said that Faye's call had changed things. He said that when he went back and looked at the timeline, the specialist's suggestion, the estate consultant at the door, the certified letter, he couldn't look at it as concern anymore, not in good faith. He asked me what I needed from him. I said, "Show up." He stayed for 2 weeks. The guardianship petition was heard in early November. Yvette appeared on my behalf with the neurologist's report, the documentation I had gathered over 5 months, Faye's written account, the neighbor statements, and the affidavit retraction. Tommy sat in that courtroom beside me. He had also submitted his own statement, and I still haven't read it because he told me it would make me cry and I wanted to keep my composure. The petition was denied. The judge, a woman about Melissa's age, with reading glasses and a very still manner, reviewed everything and said in terms that were measured but unmistakable that the evidence presented did not support the claim of cognitive impairment, and that the nature of the documentation suggested a pattern of pressure rather than protection. I watched Melissa's face when the judge said that. I had not planned what I felt in that moment. It was not triumph exactly. It was something quieter and more complicated. It was grief still, after everything. It was the grief of a mother who knows the exact age her daughter learned to ride a bike, who remembers the exact sentence her daughter said when her father died. I can't believe he won't see the kids grow up, and who now has to hold all of that alongside what this same person did. There is no instruction for that. You just carry it. Melissa called me 3 days after the hearing. I let it go to voicemail. She called again the following week. I let that go too. She sent a letter, handwritten, several pages, that arrived just before Thanksgiving. I read it once, set it on the kitchen table, and then sat with a cup of coffee and thought about what I want to do. I haven't responded yet. I'm still thinking. Tommy called on Thanksgiving morning from Portland, where he spent the holiday with friends. We talked for almost an hour. He asked about Faye, about Harlan, about the bird feeder in the backyard. He'd noticed it needed new seed when he was here and had ordered some online before he left. It arrived 2 days after he flew home. I put it out on the same hook Gerald used, and the Juncos came back within the afternoon. My life looks different to me now than it did before all of this started. Not darker exactly, more clear. I know what my name on a deed means. I know what just family can be used to mean. I know that the people who protect you are not always the ones you'd have predicted, and that a neighbor with a spiral notebook and a long memory is worth more than I had understood. I'm still in the house. I made a pot of coffee this morning with the old percolator. The light came through the backsplash tiles at the same angle it always has. I have a book I'm halfway through and tomatoes still coming in from the garden, later than they should be, but stubborn, which I have always respected. I want to say one thing clearly before I finish, because I have seen the comments on stories like mine, and I know what people are wondering. You are not too old to protect yourself. You are not too soft, not too trusting, not too grieving. The fact that you loved someone enough to be vulnerable to them does not mean you owe them your silence. Write things down. Find one person outside the situation who will tell you the truth. Call a lawyer before you need one. Do not sign anything when you are tired or scared or sad. And if someone tells you that your house is too much for you, that your life is too much for you, pour your coffee. Take a breath. Then start your notebook. I've been thinking a lot lately about what it actually means to be prepared. Not in the survival kit sense, not in the way people mean when they talk about retirement planning or long-term care. I mean prepared in the quiet, internal way. The kind that doesn't announce itself, that doesn't look like anything from the outside, that you build slowly over decades just by paying attention to how life actually works. What Melissa did came from a real place, I think. That's the part I keep returning to. She wasn't born wanting to take something from me. She was scared, probably scared of debt, scared of falling behind, scared of what it would mean if the financial picture she and her husband had built kept unraveling. Fear does something to people's reasoning. It doesn't excuse what she did. But I understand it, and I think understanding it is part of what kept me from making decisions I'd regret. When you understand why someone is hurting you, you can respond to the situation clearly instead of just to the pain. What I didn't do, what I'm proud of not doing, was collapse into my grief about it. That was the real temptation. Not to sign anything, not to hand over the house. The temptation was to simply stop functioning, to decide that if my own daughter thought I was a burden, maybe I was. That particular kind of despair is a trap that gets laid for older women specifically, and I've watched it close around people I love. You start doubting your own memory because someone tells you to doubt it. You start believing you need managing because someone speaks about you in that tone long enough. I didn't collapse because I had spent 40 years building the kind of mind that doesn't take assertions at face value. Gerald used to say, I argued with everything, and he meant it as a complaint. But it was also a gift. I argued with Melissa's framing. I argued with the story she was trying to tell about who I was and what I needed. I asked for evidence, and when the evidence wasn't there, I found my own. Harlan told me something when this was all beginning that I wrote in the green notebook and have looked at several times since. He said, the most dangerous thing you can do right now is make yourself smaller to make this easier for her. He was right. Every instinct I had to smooth things over, to give a little here and a little there, to keep the peace. Those instincts were understandable, and they also would have cost me everything. There is a version of graciousness that is actually just self-abandonment wearing a polite face. I had to learn to tell the difference. Faye knew. Faye had been watching and writing things down before I even knew to ask her to. That is the thing about people who have lived long and paid attention. They recognize patterns. They've seen enough versions of a story to know where it's going before the middle is over. I owe her more than I can say, and I've told her so. She told me to stop thanking her and bring over the tomatoes already. What I want to leave with anyone who has listened this far is something simple. Your age is not a liability. Your grief is not a diminishment. The people who tried to reframe your experience as evidence of your incompetence are counting on you to believe them, and you do not have to. Keep your own records. Trust your own memory. Find the one or two people in your life who will tell you the truth even when it's inconvenient, and hold on to them. And when someone tries to make you smaller, write it down, get a lawyer, and take your time. I'm still in the house. The percolator still works. And I am not a burden. I never was.